Now, Paul said, could I come in and have a chat this morning and run through why Maxis had banned all the bad publishers who won't audit their sites. And that sort of moves us into turf, which is, sounds as if we're bullying publishers. So sometimes I wonder if I'm being a little naive or maybe a little purist, but it's actually about a lot more than that. It's all about this, it's about trust. Now, I've clearly not got a lot of experience in this area in terms of growing the hair bit, but I don't believe that this guy, even the most follically lush individual that's sitting in the audience, in 15 days can grow that amount of hair. And that was before I actually spotted that it's actually called hair loss sparry rather than hair loss spray. So if you are worried about going bald, don't go to chinahairloss.com, because that's the kind of product that they're flogging. And this is fundamentally, all we need to do from a media agency perspective is know that we're getting what it says on the can. And it's increasingly a problem it's not just holding us back in terms of digital investment, it's actually holding us back in terms of where the whole media industry is going. All we want to know is that when we're buying a media campaign, if we are after these very excited 20-somethings who want to blow their cash on our retail goods, we're able to speak to them, and we're able to speak to this particular number of them. What we often find is something vaguely like it. Now, you could argue that that nice old dear, she's got a credit card out, she's about to spend some money with us anyway, so it's not too much of an issue. And we'll get on to why demographics are probably becoming less of a mandate for digital, but the bigger problem for us is we need to at least know how many either lovely old ladies or eager 20-somethings that we're actually speaking to. We talked about the growth of digital for a long time, and it's amazing that we're still having to deal with these kind of issues. There are a lot of people still spending money online. And they're probably spending money online for no other reason than they're surrounded by people who keep saying everybody's online and everybody's spending money online, not necessarily understanding actually what's happening or even what they're getting. We're actually in a situation where there are some parallels to a certain extent between the way that we operate here and the way that we used to operate in the outdoor industry, say 10+ years ago. Most people who worked in a media agency have probably done this. I remember speaking to a guy at a telco about 1998, was not convinced of buses. And I said, look, I'll save the money. I'll promise you, I will save money on TV, and I'll tell you how we need to approach this, why it's going to be valuable to the business, and you're going to see it everywhere. Saved the money, rang the bus company up, and I said, just get me a bus that goes up and down the road outside the guy's office. Everybody's done it, so anybody who's sitting there saying, God, that's so immoral, you've done exactly the same thing. I went to a meeting with him about 3 weeks later, and he said, right, I put budget aside for buses. You were absolutely right. I've seen that thing everywhere. and there was one bus, and it just went up and down his street, and we made sure that he was exposed to it. Now, go forward about 7 years, and I was working with a confectionery company, and they brought in a digital consultant. I love consultants. I think it's Latin for no responsibility at a 5 times multiplier or something. They've come into the business, taken the marketing team through how they should be using digital. We find it quite frustrating to work with them because every single recommendation was around page takeovers. Everything's got to be a page takeover. And I said to this consultant, after we were working for about 3 or 4 weeks, I said, if you're a TV consultant, all you're doing is saying, every time you run on air, you've got to run a 60-second television commercial. And that's burning money. Why would you do that? And she said, well, we want to get these guys to spend online. The only way they're going to see this thing is if we just keep doing homepage takeovers, because they won't see the other stuff. It's exactly the same as the bus running up and down the street. And it's an awful situation to be in when we've got something that's accountable as digital is, when we're still applying 12-year-old outdoor processes to try and encourage clients to actually use it. And I know it sounds a bit melodramatic, but doing this is actually holding up where we're going as an industry. It's not just about being able to measure digital and make sure that we're getting what we pay for. It's actually slowing down what we're doing. And clients aren't waiting for us to get this right. If you are an advertiser, you are probably very used to publishers, agencies coming in, giving you grandiose claims about what digital can deliver, and then you don't necessarily see that translated when you start to look at your media plan and when you start to look at sales. So people are moving ahead with their own metrics. There's enough data that lives in business. I was just standing downstairs waiting to get a coffee, and there was a guy from a tire company. There's a data conference going on somewhere in the building, and he was talking about how he uses data to better understand how his advertising is working, so that he knows how many tires he's selling. He doesn't care about media metrics, and we're making media metrics increasingly redundant unless we take some responsibility around the proof points that sort of live behind audiences. And also that doesn't bode well for the internet per se, because the businesses that are most affected by digital commerce, they're the ones who don't need media metrics. They work on acquisition metrics, or they'll run campaigns and then they know whether it's working because they'll get a certain amount of leads. And that resigns, with no disrespect to direct response, that resigns the internet to being a DR platform. It's not. It's going to limit being able to use it for brand work. And I know there will be publishers, I spoke to one this week, start to come out in hives when I suggested we were limiting brand work that we could do online. And yeah, you can do brand work online, but the start point for brand work is not as, I hesitate to use the word grey, it's not as clinical as numbers relating to numbers. It can be based on an emotional insight. You know, we buy brands because of the things that they mean to us as individuals, or the way that we believe they represent us. So when we're planning those campaigns, we start to look at how we can speak to certain sets of individuals. That may be a socio-demographic, it might be a combination of people with certain lifestyle choices. That starts to then take the internet out of the pie when we start to plan media campaigns, because if we can't rely on the fact that the audiences we're planning against for a digital platform are actually not a real representation of the people we're after, it just becomes too hard. And there's too many other choices that allow you to actually go down the road of putting together brand work more effectively. So we're limiting the scope of digital. And that feeds into a whole gamut of areas, not just visuals that we should be using for commercial purposes, but the kind of content that we should be getting people to interact with as well. We're also getting to this point where, you know, we could plan a digital campaign these days with about 8, maybe 9 different data sources, and all of them would actually tell you that we're in a position where we've got good, sound data that's giving us some direction, and don't worry, Mr. Advertiser, Mrs. Advertiser, your money's going to be spent responsibly. If you line those 8 different data sources up against each other, you'd actually end up with quite different campaigns. And that's not good news. We've actually got too much data, and that we are compounding that problem with a lot of inaccuracies. This is a good example, and this is for television. Now, unfortunately for you guys, this was the high point of the presentation because it was interactive. I was going to shut up and use an iPad and you'd all go ooh and ah, but we're stuck with PowerPoint, so my apologies. What this is a Roamby hotspot screen. Along the top is every single television network that we've got access to. And down the side is every single time zone that we've got access to. It works very, very simply. All the red spots are areas where audiences have dropped for a given period. The green spots are where audiences have increased. So a television buyer can very, very quickly look at that screen and they know where the areas are to focus on. They can run their fingers through it. It will, as soon as they stop on a particular point, it will bring up that TV station, that time zone. It will tell them what the audience has done, or they can focus on a particular group of areas. That's brilliant. We've got very, very good at putting lots of data together. But fundamentally, the guy who's then buying that television campaign is buying the television campaign exactly the same way I did in 1994 when I had 3 TV stations and 7 day parts. I've still got to pick up the phone, and I've still got to execute any of the implications that I see from that screen. So it's all very well being very smart and getting data all in the same place and be able to look at it and understand it. But if the way that you then execute the learnings from that data, if indeed you've got people who can say, in a nutshell, that's what's going on, is still limited by the sort of antiquated approaches that we've got to the way that we buy media. You know, publishers, you apply this to the internet. This is just television. Imagine this for the internet. Imagine if we could do this same thing and we could look at every single publisher and we could actually get that down to minutes for publishers. We've had a go at it, but you can't actually see anything. It's just a blur because you've got so many different options. So if we can't manage this properly with television, we're definitely not going to be able to do it with digital, with people actually executing this at the other end. So the secret of sort of moving forward and allowing us to be able to do this properly is automating big chunks of this. So, I mean, you know, if we could, and again, I know people feel uncomfortable about it when we talk about selling inventory in an open market, but if we could buy media, or a big chunk of that commoditized stuff. If you bear in mind that your buyer, when they're looking at that screen, same with digital publishers, they'll just go for the easy option because they've got to deliver big chunks of audience, and it's easier to speak to half a dozen people than it is to speak to all of the people on there. So they'll automatically go to where they're going to get the biggest bang for their buck. The commoditized stuff, the spots that run on some of the smaller cable stations, some of the smaller HD stations, that stuff just ends up sort of falling wherever it happens to go. Nobody's taking any responsibility for it, which is quite alarming. That's happening on television, definitely is happening, and we can measure it on television. It's definitely happening from a digital perspective, and we've got less chance of measuring it there. So let's assume if you look at spots or impressions, if 70, 80% of that stuff is just commoditized, tiny little incremental bits of exposure, why can't we buy that stuff like we buy search? Have an open market, have systems like the share markets have. We've already got kit in the form of things like DSPs that are smart enough to be able to make decisions a lot faster than a person can make a decision. In a share market, real-time buying systems, they will make a decision based on trends for a particular share, and you can put in predetermined parameters, but it will make a decision quicker than the buyer can on whether that share is a smart move. And all the little stuff gets bought that way. The big stuff, buy it in a completely different way. No business would ever create their cream inventory and give it away at a commoditized cost. So the other 20 or 30%, let's buy that in a different way, sponsorship or something. Well, they've been doing this in Japan with television for years. It gives the television networks more confidence as well. You go to like an upfront process every 6 months. Television networks will give you an outline of all of their main shows, and that will represent the peak cream that's going to be running on those networks. You commit money for a 6-month period to follow those shows. That allows the television networks then to be comfortable that they've got revenue in the bank, so you don't end up with this crash and burn approach to television that we experience in this market as well. And then the other stuff gets bought on a more commoditized process. It's not automated, but it allows the cream to rise above the rest of the inventory. A decent margin is delivered on that kind of stuff, and then the commoditized stuff is what people day-to-day trade on. We could actually get a far better, and this is where I say I sound as if I'm being a bit melodramatic, but if we were to do this, we've got this sort of 80-20 scenario in agencies at the moment. Anybody who's sitting in this room is a client. You will have experienced pitches where people come in and they tell you about how the world's going to change and check out our planning product and all our bits of kit, and we're fabulous, go with us. That's 20% of what we're doing. 80%, this elephant in the room, is still trying to execute this stuff. And something's going to break because there are just more and more and more and more options. And I'm using television because it's an easy analogy, but the problem is 10, 20-fold with digital. If we get to a point where we can automate a lot of the trading of this commoditized inventory, we suddenly free up 30% of the time that people are spending on just picking up phones and speaking to individuals and buying inventory, and have more quality thinking time, more quality input time. This issue with the amount of data that we've got, the sheer breadth of it, and having a very limited amount of people who can actually see data and say that's what it means, rather than just sort of throw it back at the client and say, well, there's loads of research there, and then the plan represents nothing to do with the research. We can solve those kind of problems. We can actually get rid of bookers. We've got a lot of media bookers in our industry. We can actually have people who are traders, plugged into data exchanges, plugged into ad exchanges, and making smart decisions about how to spend client money effectively. But none of that will ever happen. None of that will move on unless the basis of the data that those automated systems are working on you can trust. I would never condone a client using an automated system to transact cash for inventory at the moment for digital, and I know I'm going to end up with a couple of questions on the back of that comment, but because you can't rely on the data. Unless we've got something else to overlay on that, which is directly hooked into the client's business, and that brings us back to that only really being able to work with acquisition-based clients, I don't trust the data enough to be able to say to a client responsibly, if we take that money, I know that you will get $100,000 worth of widgets. So what are the solutions, I suppose? This dominates everything that happens in the media industry from a trading perspective, particularly from a digital trading perspective. Transparency is absolutely key. I think in the short term, independence in terms of monitoring and making sure that what we are buying is doing what it says on the can is absolutely key. And what is measured versus the way it measured needs to change. We spend all of our time focusing on the M chunk of this cost per thousand equation. Publishers do it all the time. Nobody actually spends any time working out the cost of the inventory. If you made any single product and you sold that product for exactly the same price, regardless of how much time, effort, the quality of it versus the other bits of product in your portfolio, people would call you crazy. But we do that with digital inventory because all we do is try and bang up that M figure. So there's thousands and thousands and thousands more bits you're getting for your money. Nobody's actually focusing on the C bit. And with digital, we can actually do that. I mean, we've got, you know, the strength of digital is not just incremental exposure. It's the way that we can engage with people. Young men, very, very, very difficult audience to try and pin down. We know that they're spending 20, 25 minutes playing with tablets in different environments, but we can't necessarily prove that at the moment. Now, if you had a method of being able to say, well, instead of focusing on the M, let's focus on the C bit. I know that my cost per thousand exposure for a particular site, because I can prove engagement lasts 10 seconds, is worth X, then my cost per thousand for a piece of exposure that lasts for 20 minutes clearly is worth more. So suddenly we're in a position where if we're honest about the data that's backing this stuff up, both in terms of the numbers and then feeding in the time that people are spending in front of those devices, we can start to index CPMs. I'd be more than happy for guys in the media agency to be paying a premium for a CPM if I can prove that somebody's spending a given amount of time with that particular piece of content. And I'm sure publishers would be more than happy to charge us a premium for it as well. But right now, that's never going to happen. Every CPM goes out at pretty much the same price, regardless of whether someone's spending 20 minutes with it or whether it's just something they see in their peripheral vision. That's crazy to be producing a product and the amount of effort and investment that goes into producing good quality content. That's crazy to be selling products that way. How we do it, I must admit, I think this is sort of comes back to this naivety chunk. I believe that we should chop up research that we have access to online into these kind of areas. There's a lot of tension at the moment in terms of how we measure digital. And if the strength of digital is medium to small publishers, then by definition, if we're creating a piece of research that doesn't necessarily answer small to medium publishers, we haven't got a piece of research that's for the internet. That's not to say that what we have is wrong. It means that rather than having one piece of research that measures everybody exactly the same way, let's move into different areas. For niche publishers, why do we even bother speaking about demographics, and why do we bother speaking about impressions? Let's work something out around content. If I'm selling cars, and I can be pretty sure that a niche site specializes in a particular area of the automotive industry, I don't care if that's all 65-year-olds, if it's all 18-year-olds, or somewhere in between. They're into that content. So we should be able to move into an area where we can actually invest clients' money based on content types. By definition, if you just try and measure everything via people-type approaches, you're never going to pick up those little niche areas because they're a smaller percentage of the population. So trying to pull them out of broader panels is going to be quite difficult. So we need a combination of the two. We need something that gives us the comfort that we can still use the internet for sort of more broadcast approaches with big publishers. That's always going to be, we're never going to get rid of demos. People are always going to want to understand basically what are the types of people that we're working with. But equally, it's limiting to only focus on that. Have something that's consistent. We talk about this regularly with the digital subcommittee. With newspapers for years, we've had circulation. Circulation applies to every single paper. But then readership chops off at a certain point because there are small rural papers that you just can't measure the sample sizes so that you can get a good, stable readership figure. And we all accept that, so we measure them with something else. But we've got one single currency that works across the entire portfolio. So let's have one single currency that works across the internet per se, whatever that may be. And there's a lot of discussion around that at the moment. And then let's look at how we chop up measurement currencies for different types of sites. But again, all of this stuff is not rocket science, but it does require everybody to be honest about their numbers. I used to think that we're all over 21, and so that's not going to be hard. We just need to have a sit down, have a chat, and recalibrate CPMs. But unfortunately, we work in advertising. No one's got any morals, and everybody will cut everybody's throat as quick as they will look at you. And that's unfortunate, but that's just the way of the world. A publisher who's been selling CPMs at a bucket of inventory at $100, for example, if the reality is that's actually only worth $70, there's never going to be a situation, I used to think there would be, but there's never going to be a situation we're all going to sit down and say, that's actually only $70, so let's just agree it's $70, and we'll recalibrate all of our other CPMs based on that price. It's never going to happen because someone will undercut someone. I think what it probably needs as literally a start point is some kind of joint industry commission where, because at the moment everybody's working in silos. Media agencies, we all sit and we moan about what's not right and what's not wrong. Publishers in various guises equally are protecting their revenue streams. Advertisers, some are confused, some, as I say, don't care. They're getting on with their own metrics and they really don't give a monkeys whether we get media metrics right or not. But all of this stuff, if we think about the way that digital should be influencing the way that we buy and we plan all media, I mean, we're 24 months away realistically from being able to apply the principles that we should be looking at for digital to outdoor, to television, and we're holding things up. So we need, and I'm not sure what that body is, I'm not sure who's going to run it, but we need to get to a point where everybody sort of sits down and we agree on some kind of transparency. I think in the short term, as I say, whoever is going to ensure that we all play nicely together needs to be a third party. It comes back to that trust thing which is lacking in the ad business. No one's going to allow agencies, nor should they, or even advertisers, to necessarily control this conversation. We need a third party to do it. It's childish, arguably, but it's about getting everybody to play nicely and agree that we work to the right metrics. If we do it, we'll end up with a lot more faith in the data that we're playing with. We will end up in a position where we can comfortably build very smart pieces of tech and kit that will run away and buy that commoditized inventory for us. We'll be able to focus on building smarter agencies. We'll be able to focus on being genuine sort of advisors and business partners to clients. Most clients just want smarter people working on their business, not kids just trying to push inventory out the door. But none of it's going to happen unless we actually get to a point where we can trust the data that we're working with. So I'm hoping that in the next sort of 12 to 18 months, we'll really nail that and we'll suddenly move on in leaps and bounds as an industry. Thank you.